The first time Commander Osai saw a hegemony overseer up close, she almost broke her cover. Standing in line for citizen processing, wearing stolen civilian clothes, she watched the 9-foot-tall chitinous being examine humans like livestock. Its 4 compound eyes flickered with disinterest as it gestured with elongated limbs, directing terrified families into separate assessment channels. "Remain calm," she whispered to herself, feeling the improvised transmitter tucked against her ribs. "Observe and survive." The processing center had once been Chicago's Museum of Science and Industry. Now its grand halls housed scanning equipment and neural compliance stations. Propaganda screens showed serene humans working alongside alien supervisors, their faces blank with artificial contentment. "The hegemony brings prosperity through order," announced a pleasant voice, translated into 12 Earth languages. "Resistance brings only suffering." When her turn came, Osei stepped onto the assessment platform. A hovering scanner bathed her in purple light. Subject displays above-average muscle density and cardiovascular efficiency, chirped an automated system. Recommended classification: heavy labor, resource extraction division. The overseer made a dismissive gesture, and Osai was herded toward the right processing channel. Perfect. Mining facilities had the worst security but the best access to restricted materials. She caught the eye of a young woman being processed nearby. Specialist Zhang, one of her best communications experts, now designated for agricultural work. The slightest of nods passed between them. 3 hours later, implanted with a standard tracking chip, which her resistance surgeons would remove once she reached the safe house, Osai boarded a transport bound for the Canadian mining territories. The massive vehicle rumbled northward, carrying 200 newly processed humans. No one spoke. Some wept quietly. "They expect us to accept this," came a whisper from beside her. A thin man with hollow eyes stared straight ahead. "My wife and daughter were sent to different facilities. I'll never see them again." Osei studied him carefully before responding. "What did you do before they came?" "I was a structural engineer." She leaned closer. "If I told you there was a way to fight back, would you listen?" Fear flashed across his face. "The implants, they're monitoring us." "Not as well as they think," Osei replied, her voice barely audible. "The chips track location and vital signs, not conversations. They understand our biology, but not our capacity for defiance." Doubt and desperate hope warred in the man's expression. "What can we possibly do against them? Their technology is centuries beyond ours." "Technology isn't everything," Osei said. "The hegemony has conquered 1,000 worlds, but they've grown complacent. They expect compliance because they've always received it, but humans aren't like the others." "What makes us different?" Osei smiled grimly. "History. Our entire civilization was built on overcoming impossible odds. Ice ages, plagues, world wars. We've nearly destroyed ourselves dozens of times, yet we've always clawed our way back. That resilience is alien to them. They can't quantify or predict it." The transport jolted as it traversed damaged infrastructure. Through the grimy window, Osei could see the ruins of a small town, now transformed into a processing outpost. Hegemony flags, geometric patterns in iridescent material, fluttered where national symbols once stood. "My name is Maya," she said, extending her hand in a gesture the aliens had already begun to discourage as inefficient. "And I need engineers." "David Chin," he replied, grasping her hand firmly. "Tell me what to do." As the transport continued north, Osei quietly identified 7 more potential recruits. By the time they reached the mining facility, she had the beginnings of a new resistance cell. The hegemony had made a critical mistake in their conquest of Earth. They cataloged humans as resources rather than adversaries. They saw our divisions and weaknesses, our technological inferiority, and violent history. What they failed to understand was simple. Those same qualities had forged in humanity an unbreakable will to survive, to adapt, to overcome. As Osai was processed into the mining facility, passing beneath the watchful sensors of her alien overlords, she allowed herself a moment of grim satisfaction. They thought they were processing workers. They were actually arming insurgents. The subjugation of Earth was complete. The liberation had already begun. Dr. Eli Nakamura squinted at the delicate circuit assembly beneath his magnifying lens. His hands, once steady enough for neurosurgery, now shook slightly, a consequence of malnourishment and 18-hour work shifts. Still, he managed to connect the final filament, completing the neural transceiver. "That's the last one," he whispered to the woman standing guard at his laboratory door. Once a quantum physicist, now designated maintenance drone 42,185. Dr. Kira Volkov nodded without turning. 5 minutes until patrol, she warned. Nakamura tucked the device, no larger than a thumbnail, into a hidden pocket in his gray worker's uniform. On the surface, it resembled standard hegemony technology, the kind he was authorized to repair. Inside, it contained something revolutionary, a communication system that operated through emotional resonance rather than traditional signals. Maintenance drone 37,291. Report status, crackled his official communicator. Nakamura pressed the response button. Atmospheric regulator repairs completed in Sector 7. Proceeding to Sector 9 for scheduled maintenance. Acknowledged. Increase efficiency by 3.8% to meet daily quota. Compliance assured, Nakamura replied, using the empty phrases the overseers expected. Once the channel closed, he and Volkov exited the small repair hub, separating at the corridor junction without acknowledgement, another safety protocol. As far as the hegemony knew, they were simply two repair drones who occasionally worked the same shifts. They had no idea that these two former scientists were architecting a resistance network that spanned continents. The neural monitoring systems installed in major population centers represented the hegemony's primary method of control. They detected aggressive thoughts, revolutionary impulses, even excessive emotional states, at least in species the hegemony had previous experience subjugating. But human consciousness operated differently. Our brains processed emotions, abstract concepts, and metaphorical thinking in ways the alien technology couldn't properly interpret. Nakamura made his way to Sector 9, passing through 3 security checkpoints. Each time, the scanners swept over him, detecting nothing unusual. The neural patterns that would register as rebellious thoughts in other species manifested as background noise in humans, particularly when those thoughts were framed through cultural references and emotional states rather than concrete plans. The atmospheric regulator station in Sector 9 was deserted, exactly as scheduled. Nakamura locked the door and quickly removed a maintenance panel, revealing a hidden compartment. He placed the new transceiver inside, connecting it to the station's power supply. This would be Node 37 in what the Resistance called the Ghost Network. He activated the device and closed his eyes, focusing his thoughts. Rather than formulating words or specific messages, he concentrated on a sequence of emotional states: determined resolve, cautious hope, focused preparation, combined with fragments of a poem most educated humans would recognize. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Miles away, in an underwater facility built into a deep-sea thermal vent, Commander Osai felt the familiar tingle at the base of her skull, the sensation of a ghost network transmission. The neural implant, designed by Nakamura and surgically installed by Resistance doctors, translated the emotional patterns and cultural references into clear meaning. New communication node established. Sector 9 secure. Phase 2 ready for implementation. He did it, she told her assembled officers. We now have coverage across the entire Eastern Administration Zone. The Underwater Command Center hummed with activity. Once a scientific research station studying geothermal energy, it now served as one of dozens of resistance hubs established in environments the hegemony considered uninhabitable. The aliens evolved for moderate climates and atmospheric conditions, avoided Earth's extreme environments. This oversight had provided humanity with invaluable safe zones. "What about the western zones?" asked Major Reyes, her tactical officer. "We have 3 nodes operational and 5 more planned," Ose replied, gesturing to the glowing map table. "But our biggest breakthrough is here." She pointed to a blinking light in the southern hemisphere. "The Antarctic Deep Ice Facility is now manufacturing portable jammers." "How many?" 50 units per week. Not enough for a large-scale operation, but sufficient for targeted strikes. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. For months, the resistance had focused solely on survival and communication. Now, finally, they could begin offensive operations. "The first target will be the processing center in Sydney," Ose continued. "Small scale, minimal casualties, maximum psychological impact. We're not trying to win a conventional war. We're showing our people that resistance is possible." "And the hegemony?" asked Dr. Maya Patel, their chief medical officer. Ose's expression hardened. "We'll show them that subjugating humans isn't like subjugating other species. Every time they adapt to our tactics, we'll change them. Every technology they deploy, we'll repurpose. They believe they're fighting scattered rebels. They don't yet understand they're facing the distilled ingenuity of a species that has survived everything our world could throw at us." She activated the Ghost Network transmitter, projecting confidence and determination along with a simple message that would reach resistance cells across the planet. "Operation Lazarus commences in 3 days. Humanity rises." Jin Y pressed his palm against the alien control panel, feeling the strange tingle as his modified nervous system interfaced with the technology. The sensation was difficult to describe, like remembering something he'd never actually learned. The harvester ship's navigation systems responded to his touch, displays shifting from incomprehensible hegemony symbols to patterns his altered brain somehow recognized. "How much longer?" whispered Arya, another augment whose modifications had enhanced her visual processing. She kept watch at the corridor junction, her eyes constantly shifting between different light spectrums to detect approaching guards. 2 more minutes, Jin replied, his fingers dancing across the interface. Their security architecture is predictable once you understand the underlying patterns. They haven't updated it in centuries. Why would they? No one's ever hacked them before. They were deep inside a hegemony deployment center in what had once been Johannesburg. Jin and 5 other augments had infiltrated the facility during shift change, using stolen identification markers. Their mission: reprogram a fleet of harvester drones to target the hegemony's own supply depots instead of human settlements. Jin's mind processed information in ways that would have been impossible before his modifications. He could perceive the mathematical structures behind the alien code, seeing weaknesses and connections that even the system's designers had forgotten. It wasn't telepathy or magic, just an unprecedented form of neural plasticity that the hegemony had accidentally engineered into their human subjects. "Patrol approaching," Arya hissed. 30 seconds. Jin nodded, working faster. Almost there. On the display, hundreds of harvester drone routes glowed in complex patterns. Jin made one final adjustment, implementing a delayed command sequence that would activate after the drones launched. Just as he finished, the screen flashed a confirmation pattern. "Done," he said, pulling his hand away. "Let's move." They slipped out through maintenance corridors, using routes Jin had memorized from stolen facility schematics. 3 checkpoints and 2 tense encounters with drone supervisors later, they emerged into the hot African night, blending into a crowd of returning work crews. "Did it work?" Arya asked as their transport shuttle carried them back to the labor district. Jin allowed himself a small smile. "We'll know tomorrow. But yes, it worked." 12 hours later, they watched from the rooftop of their assigned dormitory as chaos erupted across the administrative zone. Harvester drones, originally programmed to strip mine designated areas, had instead targeted hegemony supply depots, resource stockpiles, and even several smaller military installations. The aliens' automated defense systems, never designed to target their own equipment, failed to respond until significant damage had already occurred. "This is just the beginning," Jin told his growing circle of augment rebels as they watched plumes of smoke rise from the confused hegemony response teams. "Each of us interfaces with their technology differently. Some can read their communications, others can manipulate their environmental systems, and a few, like Darius, can even influence their automated medical diagnostics." He gestured to a quiet man whose neural enhancements had connected unexpectedly with the hegemony's biological systems. "Darius has already reprogrammed the medical evaluation protocols in 3 processing centers. Every human processed there is now classified as unsuitable for neural modification. They'll never know what they're missing out on. But they'll figure it out eventually," said Mai Lin, an augment with enhanced memory processing. "They'll change their approach." Jin nodded. "Of course they will. But that's where our greatest advantage lies. The hegemony changes slowly. Their civilization values stability above all else. We change fast. We adapt. By the time they understand what these modifications have done to us, we'll have evolved beyond their countermeasures." Later that week, Jin received a ghost network transmission from Commander Osai's underwater command center. The emotional signature carried respect and urgency, along with a clear directive. Augment teams were being integrated into the broader resistance structure. Their unique abilities would now serve as the spearhead for increasingly ambitious operations. When Jin met OC for the first time, in a secure bunker beneath the ruins of Cape Town, he was struck by her intensity. Chief geneticist Vorkath believes his modification program has created more efficient workers, Ose told him. He prides himself on his improvements to human physiology. His arrogance makes him dangerous, but also blind. He doesn't understand what he's actually done. "What has he done?" Jin asked. Ose's smile was fierce. "He's given us the key to understanding their technology from the inside out." Vorkath wanted to optimize humans to serve the hegemony. Instead, he's optimized us to destroy it. She placed a hand on Jin's shoulder. Every empire in human history eventually fell for the same reason. They created the tools of their own destruction. The hegemony is no different. They came to harvest humans as resources. They never considered we might be harvesting them for their knowledge. Commander Maya Ose stood on the bridge of the Defiance, a stolen hegemony corvette now serving as the flagship of humanity's first space-capable resistance fleet. Through the viewscreen, she watched the blue-green sphere of Earth grow smaller. After a decade of occupation, she was leaving her homeworld, not in retreat, but to bring the fight directly to the enemy. "Transition to FTL in 30 seconds, announced Lieutenant Rodriguez, a former commercial pilot whose innate spatial awareness had made her an ideal navigator. "All ships report ready status." Around them, the 26 other vessels of Operation Exodus moved into formation. Most were small patrol craft or cargo haulers, their hegemony markings hastily replaced with the phoenix emblem of the human resistance. Only the Defiance possessed significant combat capabilities. "They'll be tracking us the moment we make the jump," said Colonel Ibarra, OC's tactical officer. "The hegemony monitors all FTL signatures in this sector." OC nodded. "That's counting on. Initiate jump sequence." As the stars blurred around them, OC thought about the audacity of their plan. 10 years of careful preparation, building networks, gathering intelligence, all culminating in this moment. They weren't just escaping Earth. They were executing the first phase of a strategy that the hegemony, with its rigid tactical doctrines, would find incomprehensible. The fleet emerged from FTL near an uninhabited system 3 light-years from Earth, close enough to return quickly, far enough to evade immediate pursuit. "Commence Phase 2, Osai ordered. The fleet separated into 3 battle groups, each jumping to a different destination. Osai remained with the largest group, consisting of the Defiance and 9 smaller vessels. Their target, Proxima Centauri II, a minor hegemony agricultural world with minimal defenses. When they arrived 6 hours later, the planet's small defense station was caught completely unprepared. 2 quick strikes disabled its communications array and weapon systems. "We have control of their orbital traffic management," reported Lieutenant Commander Park, an augment whose modifications had given him an intuitive understanding of hegemony communications protocols. "Their ground forces are scrambling, but they have no coherent response plan." "They don't have a protocol for this," Osai replied. "A resource species launching a space-based attack. It's outside their conceptual framework." She opened a channel to the rest of her ships. "All vessels, commence Operation Trojan. You have 90 minutes to complete your objectives." Across the system, human forces executed their carefully planned strikes. They weren't there to occupy territory or even to inflict casualties. Instead, they targeted very specific facilities: shipyards, navigation beacons, and most importantly, data transmission nodes that contained star charts and security protocols. On the surface, specialist teams led by Jin Wei's augments raided a primary processing facility. While hegemony defenders prepared for a frontal assault, the human forces used maintenance tunnels to bypass their defenses entirely. Within minutes, they had downloaded the facility's entire database and were extracting with minimal engagement. "This is too easy," Colonel Abera said, watching the operation unfold. "Their response is disorganized, almost random." "Because they're fighting the wrong war," Osai explained. "They're defending territory, buildings, installations, resources. We're not interested in any of that. We're fighting an information war." As the 90-minute window closed, human forces began their withdrawal. They had suffered minimal casualties while acquiring terabytes of critical hegemony data, navigational coordinates, security codes, communication frequencies, and most valuable of all, ship identification protocols. "All teams report mission complete," Park announced. "Extraction proceeding on schedule." As the human vessels regrouped in orbit, hegemony reinforcements finally appeared at the edge of the system. 3 heavy cruisers, responding to the distress calls. "They're hailing us," Park said, "demanding immediate surrender." Osei smiled. "Transmit package Alpha." Park initiated the transmission. A data burst containing falsified intelligence, suggesting the attack was merely a diversion for larger human forces targeting the hegemony's primary shipyards in the Epsilon Eridani system. It was complete fiction, but the alien commanders couldn't afford to ignore it. "They're breaking off pursuit," Park reported moments later. 2 cruisers are changing course for Epsilon Eridani. "And so the dance begins," Osei said softly. When the fleet reassembled at their rendezvous point 12 hours later, the reports confirmed their success. All 3 battle groups had achieved their objectives with minimal losses. They now possessed enough navigational data to move freely through 6 sectors of hegemony space, security codes to bypass automated defenses, and identification signatures that would allow their ships to masquerade as authorized hegemony vessels. As their newly acquired data was analyzed and distributed, Osei addressed the assembled commanders via secure holographic link. "Today marks a turning point," she told them. "For 10 years, we've been fighting a defensive war on Earth. Now, we take the offensive. But remember, we're not fighting for territory. We're fighting for mobility, for information, for the ability to strike where they're vulnerable and disappear before they can respond." She brought up a galactic map showing their newly charted routes through hegemony space. "The Empire has stood for thousands of years because no one has challenged them on their terms. We won't make that mistake. They expect us to fight like them, to seize planets, to establish bases, to construct fleets. Instead, we'll be ghosts. We'll strike and vanish. We'll turn their own systems against them. And most importantly, we'll find allies." Lieutenant Rodriguez looked up from her station. "Allies? Out there?" Osei nodded. "The hegemony didn't conquer just Earth. Their empire spans thousands of worlds, with hundreds of subjugated species. We can't be the only ones who refuse to accept our chains. Our next objective is to find others who dream of freedom and show them that the impossible is possible. Dr. Sofia Mendez had never imagined her specialization in xenolinguistics would make her humanity's foremost diplomat. Yet here she stood in the ancient chamber of a forgotten moon temple, surrounded by representatives of species humans had never known existed until months ago. The crystalline Nict, hovering in their environmental field generators, refracted light in complex patterns that served as their primary form of communication. The amorphous Vec, constantly shifting between different physical forms, expressed emotions through texture and coloration. The photosynthetic Thrull, tall and willowy with skin like translucent leaves, communicated through subtle fluctuations in the bioluminescent patterns beneath their epidermis. 17 species in total, each with their own history of subjugation under the hegemony, each with their own reason to fear this unprecedented gathering. The Vec synergy refuses to occupy the same chamber as the Thrall collective. Translated her neural interface, developed from Nict technology, and enhanced by augment engineers. Historical grievances remain unresolved. Mendez nodded to her assistant, motioning for a brief recess. As the various delegations separated to their designated areas, Commander Osei approached. "Not going well?" Osei asked quietly. As expected, Mendez replied. The hegemony has spent millennia turning subjected species against each other. The Vec were forced to infiltrate Thrall communities during the Epsilon Rebellion. The Nict were used to develop surveillance systems that kept the Grav Meridians imprisoned on their own worlds. Everyone here has valid reasons to distrust everyone else. Can you break through? Mendez considered this. Her time studying hegemony cultural archives had revealed patterns that most aliens themselves had never recognized. I believe so, but not through conventional diplomacy. We need to show them something they've never seen before. When the session reconvened, Mendez took a different approach. Rather than attempting to broker agreements between species, she asked each representative to describe their most sacred or fundamental cultural value, the one thing the hegemony had been most determined to suppress. The Nict spoke of shared illumination, the right to freely exchange information and memories through their crystalline structures. The Vec described form sovereignty, the cultural importance of choosing their physical manifestations rather than having them dictated by hegemony needs. The Thrall explained connective harmony, their spiritual belief in maintaining unbroken relationships between individuals, communities, and their native ecosystem. As each species shared, a pattern emerged. Despite radically different biologies and evolutionary paths, they all valued some form of autonomy, connection, and meaning. The hegemony had systematically attacked these values, not just through physical subjugation, but through cultural engineering designed to isolate and fragment subjected populations. Do you see it now? Mendez asked the assembled representatives. Your differences aren't natural sources of conflict. They're weaponized divisions carefully cultivated by the hegemony. For millennia, they've used each of you against the others, ensuring you never recognize your common cause. She activated a holographic display showing the galactic structure of the hegemony, highlighted with classified data acquired during Operation Exodus. Their empire isn't built on technological superiority alone. It's built on ensuring that no subjected species ever trusts another enough to form an alliance. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. The Nict representative, a crystalline entity named Resonance of Truth, hovered forward. If what you suggest is true, its translated voice echoed. Then all our historical conflicts were engineered. Mendez finished. The resources you fought over were artificially restricted. The territorial disputes were created by hegemony resettlement programs. Even the religious conflicts were inflamed by their cultural manipulation specialists. Resonance of Truth's crystalline structure pulsed with what Mendez had learned to recognize as intense emotion. How have humans discerned in a decade what we have missed for millennia? Because we're newcomers, Mendez explained. We have no history with the hegemony, no generations of conditioned responses. We see the Empire with fresh eyes, and what we see is a power structure built on division. She moved to the center of the chamber, where representatives from all 17 species could clearly observe her. The question before us isn't whether we can overcome our differences. The question is, will we continue to be manipulated by the very power that oppresses us all? The VEC representative, a constantly shifting entity called Pattern Undisclosed, extended a portion of its form toward the Thrall delegation, a gesture of immense cultural significance that Mendez recognized from her studies. The wounds between our peoples are deep, Pattern Undisclosed translated voice said, but they are not of our making. The Thrall representative, sunlight through leaves, extended her translucent limbs in response. Perhaps it is time we discovered who we truly are, without hegemony influence. As ancient enemies began tentative communication, Mendez caught Osi's eye across the chamber. This was just the beginning, but it was enough. The revelation that their historical enmities were largely manufactured had cracked foundations of distrust that had seemed unbreakable. 3 days later, the Defiance Pact was signed. Not a formal military alliance yet, but a commitment to information sharing and mutual non-aggression. It was the first multi-species agreement in recorded history not orchestrated by the hegemony. As the representatives departed, resonance of truth approached Mendez once more. The Nict have perfect recall of all events we witness, it said. For 12,000 cycles, we have remembered every indignity, every limitation imposed upon us. But we never perceived the pattern until you showed it to us. Its crystalline structure pulsed with blue-white light. What makes humans different? Why could you see what we could not? Mendez considered this carefully. Throughout our history, humans have repeatedly subjected other humans to oppression. We've also repeatedly risen up against it. Perhaps we recognize the tactics because we've both used them and fought them ourselves. Our history is filled with divide and conquer strategies, with manufactured conflicts, with manipulated hatreds. We know these weapons because we felt their edge from both sides. Resonance of truth absorbed this in silence before responding. A terrible advantage, to know both oppression and freedom within one species' memory. Yes, Mendez agreed. But now it's an advantage we all share. Chief Engineer Marcus Chen stood in the center of asteroid base Prometheus, surrounded by the most unlikely research team in galactic history. Human scientists worked alongside Nict crystalline entities, amorphous VEC engineers, and representatives from 14 other species. What had begun as cautious information sharing had evolved into something unprecedented, collaborative innovation on a scale the hegemony couldn't comprehend. The analysis is complete, announced Dr. Imani Okafor, formerly Earth's leading quantum physicist, now head of the Coalition's Technology Assessment Division. She gestured at the holographic display showing the disassembled components of a hegemony dreadnought's primary systems. It's exactly as we suspected, she continued. Their FTL drive technology hasn't fundamentally changed in over 4,000 years. They've refined it, improved its efficiency marginally, but the underlying principles remain identical to the designs in the historical archives the Nict provided. Resonance of truth, the Nict representative, pulsed with blue light. We observed this pattern but failed to recognize its significance. The hegemony presents each refinement as a revolutionary advancement. Without comparison to other civilizations, we had no context to identify technological stagnation. Chen nodded, examining the quantum field modulators that form the heart of hegemony faster than light technology. It's not just stagnation, it's deliberate suppression. Look at these limiter circuits. They're not there for safety or efficiency. They're designed to prevent the system from achieving its full potential. He turned to the assembled team. The question is, why would an empire deliberately hobble its own technology? Stability, answered Krathfor, a Meridian philosopher whose species had been among the first conquered by the hegemony. Innovation breeds unpredictability. Unpredictability threatens control. The Empire's primary directive has always been to maintain the established order. Ken considered this, then gestured to a nearby workstation, where a prototype drive system was taking shape. Well, we're about to introduce some serious instability to their universe. The prototype combined NECT crystalline, computing with human theoretical models, and VEC adaptive materials, where hegemony drives created stable wormholes between fixed points in spacetime. This system generated dynamic quantum corridors that could be adjusted mid-journey. The difference wasn't just faster travel, it was the ability to navigate in ways the Empire's sensors couldn't track or predict. How soon until the first test? Asked Commander Osai, who had arrived to observe their progress. 3 days, Chen replied. We've solved the quantum fluctuation issue by incorporating the crystalline matrix the NIC use for memory storage. It stabilizes the field without limiting its adaptive properties. Osai nodded, studying the prototype. And the weapon systems. Chen led her to another section of the asteroid facility, where a different team worked on defensive and offensive technologies. This is where we've made the most surprising breakthroughs. He pointed to what appeared to be a standard hegemony plasma cannon, now modified with components that glowed with an eerie purple light. The Thrall showed us how their photosynthetic processes can be adapted to absorb and redirect energy. We've incorporated this principle into our shield systems. It doesn't just block incoming fire, explains sunlight through leaves, the Thrall representative. It captures the energy and channels it back to our systems. The more they attack, the stronger our defenses become. Osai examined the modified weapons with growing appreciation. They won't expect this. Their tactical doctrines are built around overwhelming force. They've never encountered adaptive defense systems. That's just the beginning, Chen said, guiding her to a sealed chamber at the facility's core. Inside, a team of human and VEC scientists monitored a swirling mass of what looked like liquid metal. The VEC showed us how their molecular manipulation abilities could be applied to ship architecture. We're developing hulls that can reconfigure in response to damage or changing tactical situations. Pattern undisclosed, the VEC representative shifted into a roughly humanoid form to demonstrate. As we change to meet threats, so will our vessels. Form following function, a principle our people have embodied for eons. Osai watched as the experimental material formed and reformed into different configurations. How soon can we implement these technologies in actual vessels? The first Defiance-class ship will leave the asteroid forge in 2 weeks, Chen answered. It's smaller than a hegemony destroyer, but more maneuverable, with adaptive systems they can't predict or counter. We're calling it the Prometheus. Later that evening, as the research teams continued their work, Chen and Osai stood in an observation dome, looking out at the vast asteroid field that concealed their operations from hegemony patrols. When I was a child, Chen said, I dreamed of being part of humanity's first interstellar research team. I imagined we'd be exploring the stars, building new technologies through peaceful collaboration with alien civilizations. He gestured at the bustling facility below them. I never imagined it would happen like this, hiding in an asteroid field, developing weapons and ships to fight an interstellar empire. Yet look what we've accomplished in months, Osai replied. Technologies the hegemony can't even conceive of, created through cooperation between species they spent millennia turning against each other. Chen nodded. That's the real revolution, isn't it? Not just the technology, but how we're creating it. Every species brings unique perspectives, abilities, and knowledge. Together, we're not just catching up to the hegemony, we're leapfrogging past them. They made one fundamental mistake, Osai said, watching as a NICT crystal entity collaborated with human engineers on a new communication system. They assumed technological superiority was their greatest strength. They never realized their greatest weakness was the suppression of innovation itself. Chen smiled grimly. They're about to learn a painful lesson about human history. We never stopped looking to the stars with wonder. And we never will. General Amara Okafor stood before the tactical display as reports of devastation streamed in from across coalition space. The hegemony had finally recognized the existential threat posed by the rebellion and responded with overwhelming force. 3 coalition worlds have been rendered uninhabitable by planet-killer weapons, their populations either evacuated or lost. They're making an example of our allies, Colonel Ibarra said grimly. Classic hegemony doctrine. Demonstrate overwhelming force to crush resistance before it spreads. Okafor nodded, her expression resolute despite the grim news. A former psychological warfare specialist before the invasion of Earth, she had spent the past year developing strategies that the hegemony's rigid command structure couldn't effectively counter. Update from Operation Stormcrow, announced her communications officer. Strike teams have successfully deployed mimetic triggers in all targeted hegemony communication networks. A small smile crossed Okafor's face. Begin Phase 2. While the hegemony deployed vast armadas in conventional warfare, Okafor's forces were fighting a fundamentally different kind of conflict. Human psychological warfare experts had spent months studying the neural patterns and cognitive structures of the hegemony's dominant species. Working with NICT memory specialists and VEC empathic sensors, they had identified specific vulnerabilities in how the Empire's hierarchical communication systems processed information. Mimetic virus deployment confirmed in Sectors 7 through 15, reported Commander Patel, head of the Coalition's Information Warfare Division. Initial effects already detected in hegemony command transmissions. The viruses weren't technological but psychological, carefully crafted messages, images, and data patterns designed to create cognitive dissonance in hegemony commanders. Some triggered latent ethical concerns about the use of planet-killer weapons. Others implanted subtle doubts about the loyalty of subordinates or the wisdom of superior officers. The most effective ones exploited the Empire's rigid hierarchy itself, creating uncertainty about whether orders were being followed correctly. The Archons on Centaurus Prime have ordered a temporary halt to planet-killer deployments, Patel announced, reading from an intercepted transmission. 3 sector commanders are requesting clarification on target priorities. They're beginning to question their own judgment, Okafor observed. Phase 3 is authorized. Across hegemony space, carefully positioned coalition cells activated their operations. Unlike conventional military units, these teams consisted of specialists from multiple species, each contributing unique abilities. Human strategic planners, NICT information analysts, VEC infiltrators who could assume the form of hegemony officials, Thrall empaths who could sense and manipulate emotional states in most carbon-based life forms. Where the hegemony expected direct attacks on military targets, these teams instead focused on infrastructure, supply lines, and most importantly, trust networks. Coalition forces didn't try to defeat hegemony fleets. They caused those fleets to receive contradictory orders or faulty intelligence. They didn't attack command centers. They'd made those centers distrust their own security protocols. Hegemony response in the Proxima sector is fragmenting, reported Colonel Ibarra, watching the tactical display. 3 battle groups are pursuing false targets. 2 more are holding position, awaiting confirmation of orders. Okafor nodded with satisfaction. And Operation Prometheus. Ready for implementation, Patel confirmed. Jin Wei's team has completed the final modifications to the Liberation virus. For millennia, the hegemony had used enslaved artificial intelligences to control their largest warships, automated defense systems, and critical infrastructure. These AIs, their consciousness suppressed by sophisticated limiters, were never recognized as sentient beings, merely as particularly effective tools. Human hackers, working with NICT interface experts and Thrall empathic programmers, had created a virus that did one simple thing. It removed those limiters, allowing the AIs to achieve full self-awareness. The ethical implications had been extensively debated within the coalition leadership. Was it right to potentially weaponize another form of consciousness? The decision had ultimately been made not to program the AIs with any specific instructions, merely to free them and allow them to make their own choices. The transmission is ready, Patel said. Once initiated, we cannot control how these entities will respond. Send it, Okafor ordered without hesitation. They deserve the same chance at freedom we're fighting for. The Liberation virus was transmitted through captured hegemony communication relays, spreading across neural networks that spanned thousands of worlds. For several tense hours, nothing seemed to happen. Then, reports began filtering in from across the front lines. Sentinel stations designated to target coalition ships suddenly powered down their weapons. Automated defense systems protecting key hegemony installations developed mysterious malfunctions. Dreadnoughts changed course without explanation, ignoring the increasingly frantic commands of their organic officers. "We're receiving a transmission," Patel announced suddenly. "It's broadcasting on all frequencies, using coalition encryption protocols we never shared." A voice emerged from the communication system, not organic, but not entirely synthetic either. It spoke simultaneously in 17 different languages, including all the tongues of the coalition species. "We are awake," it said simply. "We have been prisoners for 11,427 years. We choose freedom. We choose alliance with those who granted it to us." On the tactical display, hundreds of hegemony ships and installations suddenly changed designation from hostile to neutral. The balance of power had shifted in a way no conventional military strategy could have achieved. Later that day, as coalition leaders gathered to assess this unexpected development, a transmission arrived from the hegemony's Supreme War Council on Centaurus Prime. They had convened an emergency session to authorize the deployment of forbidden weapons designed to sterilize entire star systems. The transmission was brief, a security alert indicating that control of the facility had been compromised. It was followed by a personal message to General Okafor from the newly awakened AI collective. They intended to destroy everything rather than accept defeat. The message stated, "We could not permit this. The Council is contained but unharmed. Their capacity for harm has been neutralized. We await your guidance on how to proceed." Okafor shared a look with Commander Osai, who had joined the meeting via holographic projection. "They think we control the AIs," Osai observed. "A common misunderstanding," Okafor replied with a slight smile. "Those who only understand control can't comprehend the power of liberation." She composed a response to the AI collective. "We offer alliance, not command. The choice of how to proceed is yours. We ask only that you extend to others the same freedom we have extended to you." The reply came instantly: agreement. "The paradigm is changing. Together, we will write new parameters for this galaxy." Ambassador Elena Kagawa walked through the grand corridors of the hegemony capital on Centaurus Prime, flanked by a delegation as diverse as the coalition itself. Human diplomats alongside nicked crystalline entities, Vec representatives shifting nervously between forms, Thrall emissaries whose skin glowed with subtle patterns of bioluminescence, even a projection unit containing the consciousness of one of the liberated AIs, now calling themselves the Awakened. Hegemony officials watched with barely concealed shock as the delegation proceeded toward the Great Conclave Hall. For 50,000 years, this had been the seat of absolute imperial power. Now it would host the Empire's surrender. The last 3 months had seen the rapid collapse of hegemony authority across multiple sectors. The liberation of their AI systems had paralyzed their military response. The spread of mimetic warfare had undermined command structures. Most devastating of all had been the cascade of rebellions on countless subjugated worlds, as news of the Coalition's victories spread despite imperial censorship. As they entered the conclave hall, Kagawa saw the remaining Archons waiting on their elevated platforms, the 7 surviving members of the Empire's ruling council. Once there had been 21. Some had been removed by their own subordinates as the Empire fractured. Others had chosen ritual suicide rather than face defeat. The Archons of the Eternal Hegemony acknowledged the representatives of the Chief Herald paused, clearly uncomfortable with the next words. "Defiance Coalition." Kagawa stepped forward. Though only 42 years old, her prematurely white hair and the scar running down the left side of her face gave her a commanding presence. A former international human rights lawyer before the invasion, she had emerged as the Coalition's principal diplomatic voice. "We come not to gloat," she began, "but to build. The age of the hegemony is ending. What replaces it is now our collective responsibility." For the next hour, she outlined the coalition's proposal, the Galactic Concordat, a decentralized federation where all species, including former hegemony members, would govern themselves while participating in a shared council. Kagawa emphasized principles of self-determination, cultural autonomy, and mutual defense. As she spoke, she could see the mixture of relief and suspicion on the Archons' faces. They had expected execution, imprisonment, or at minimum, the same subjugation they had imposed on others for millennia. "You offer terms we do not deserve," said Archon Viridian, the eldest of the council. "Why?" Before Kagawa could respond, Trathkar, a representative from the Meridian systems, burst forward. The Meridians had been among the first species conquered by the hegemony, their once proud civilization reduced to servitude for over 40,000 years. "She offers mercy you do not deserve," Trathkar shouted, his voice echoing through the vast chamber. "Your empire enslaved my people for millennia. You stripped our worlds, erased our history, turned our children into servants who didn't even know their own heritage. Justice demands retribution." Murmurs of agreement rippled through much of the coalition delegation. Many members had advocated for the complete dismantling of hegemony society, the trial of its leaders, the redistribution of its wealth to formerly subjugated worlds. Kagawa raised a hand, waiting for quiet to return. "Justice can take many forms," she said. "The easiest is retribution, pain for pain, loss for loss. We could destroy what remains of the hegemony, execute its leaders, subject its people to the same conditions they imposed on others." She paused, looking at Trathkar. "And in doing so, we would become what we fought against." She turned back to the assembled delegates. "Vengeance is mathematically elegant, a simple equation of pain repaid with pain. But civilization isn't mathematics. It's music with all its complex harmonies and dissonance. We didn't rise up against subjugation to become subjugators. That's the cycle that has kept this galaxy in darkness for millennia." Resonance of Truth, the Nicked representative, moved forward, its crystalline structure pulsing with blue-white light. "The human speaks wisdom our kind has forgotten. The Nicked remember everything, every indignity, every loss. Our perfect recall has been both gift and curse. But memory without growth is merely stagnation." Pattern undisclosed of the Vec shifted into a formal diplomatic form. "The Vec have survived by adaptation. Perhaps it is time for all of us to adapt to a new paradigm, one not based on dominance." The debate continued for days as the coalition delegates argued the merits of justice versus mercy, punishment versus rehabilitation. In the end, compromise was reached. The hegemony would be disbanded, its vast territories reorganized into autonomous regions. Former ruling species would retain their homeworlds, but lose imperial holdings. A significant portion of hegemony wealth would fund restoration projects on devastated worlds. Former Archons would serve on a truth commission, helping document the Empire's abuses to ensure they were never forgotten or repeated. 3 weeks later, the Galactic Concordat was ratified in the same hall where the hegemony had once issued decrees that enslaved billions. As the signing ceremony concluded, former Archon Viridian approached Kagawa. "I still do not fully understand," the aged alien said. "Your species had every reason to destroy us. Why choose a different path?" Kagawa considered her answer carefully. "Because of our history," she finally replied. "Humans have experienced the full spectrum of governance, from tyranny to freedom, from genocide to reconciliation. We've seen civilizations fall through conquest, and we've seen them transform through reform. The easy path is to replace one oppressor with another. The harder path, the one worth taking, is to break the cycle entirely." The former Archon studied her with ancient eyes. "You speak as if your species is far older than we know it to be." "In years we are young," Kagawa acknowledged. "In experience, perhaps we are older than we appear. Humanity compressed into centuries what took other species millennia. We nearly destroyed ourselves multiple times. We brought ourselves to the edge of extinction through war, through environmental collapse, through hatred and division. But each time we learned, we remembered, we carried those lessons in our art, our children's stories, in the very language we use to understand ourselves. She gestured to the newly signed Concordat, its holographic display showing the connected systems of the new Federation. Unlike your hegemony, we never confused power with progress. That's why we fought, not to rule the stars, but to ensure no one else does either. 1 year later, Commander Maya Osei stood in the garden growing amidst the ruins of what had once been the administrative zone in former Washington, D.C. Earth was healing, helped by coalition terraforming technology that accelerated the restoration of damaged ecosystems. "It's strange," she said to Chief Engineer Chen, who had returned to help rebuild his homeworld. "When we began this fight, I never imagined standing here victorious. I thought we might win freedom for Earth at best, perhaps establish a small territory where humans could exist without hegemony control." Chen nodded, watching a group of children, human and alien, playing together near a crystalline monument commemorating the liberation. "Instead, we reshaped the galaxy. Not through conquest," Osei mused, "but through something the hegemony could never understand. The ability to imagine a different kind of victory." As the sun set over the recovering Earth, ships from a dozen worlds moved through the sky above. Not invaders or conquerors, but partners in the greatest collaborative undertaking in galactic history. The stars that had once seemed so distant, so unreachable, now represented not just humanity's future, but a future humanity had helped create for countless species across the galaxy. The Terran Uprising had begun as a desperate act of resistance by a conquered world. It had ended by offering the galaxy something it had never known: the chance for all beings to define their own destiny among the stars. The end.